Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Pesachim Ayin Gimel. We are 3 lines from the top of the Amud, Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Getting back to our Mishnah, which told us that although a Korban Pesach may be brought on Shabbos, that is only if it's a Korban Pesach which is kosher. However, if it's pasul, in which case it's considered like he did a malacha. Shechita is one of the malachas, netilas neshama, extracting blood which contains the nefesh. In that case, he will bring a chatas. So if the korban is kosher, that's fine. If it's pasul, he's chayav a chatas. Says the Gemara, shchata shlo lo'ichlav. This is an example of a korban pesach which is pasul. The shechita was for the sake of non-eaters, and since it's pasul, he is chayav chatas upon doing that malacha. Pshita, says the Gemara, of course. What's the point of the Mishnah? Kiva and dahasam pasul. Since we've already learned elsewhere, back in Perek Tav and Nishchat on Daf Samach Aleph, that a Pesach must be shechted for the oichlav, then obviously if it's shloil oichlav, it's pasul, and the natural result is that he's chayiv achatas. Pshita, kiva and dahasam pasul. Since over there we learned that this type of Korban Pesach is pasul, hacha chayiv. Then obviously, if he does it on Shabbos, he has done a malach and he's chayav chatas. What's the chiddush of our Mishnah? Mishum detana seifa potter, says the Gemara, because the Mishnah wanted to give us examples in the seifa where he is potter. For instance, in a case where his kavanah during the shechita was for a joint group, some oichlav, some non-oichlav, in which case, as long as there's somebody that can eat, it's considered a shechita kshera, and therefore he's potter on Shabbos. So on account of that case, Mishum detana seifa potter, tana reisha chayav. That's why over here the Mishnah listed cases where he is chayiv. So on account of that, we went into this list as well. V'hanami pshita. Well, that's also pashut. Mishum dahasam kasher. In the case where you have a dual intent, some eaters, some non-eaters, since over there in the Mishnah and Tam Nishchat, we've already learned that it's kasher. Potter, of course, in this case, naturally, it follows that it's potter here. What's the chiddush here? It's a very straightforward formula. When it's pasul, then if it's done on Shabbos, he's chayiv. Where it's kosher, then if it's done on Shabbos, he's potter. So what's the chiddush of that halacha? Elo, says the Gemara, I did the tana shachta shlo l'shmoi b'Shabbos. On account of the fact that the Mishnah found it necessary to open up the discussion with the case of a shechita shelo l'shmoi on Shabbos, where is chayiv. That's why the Mishnah continued and discussed also the case of shloil oichlav, which is another example of psul, and on account of that, it proceeded to the other cases as well. V'higufa lamali, but that itself is also a non-chiddush. The fact that a shechita shloil l'shmoi is pasul, and therefore if it's done on Shabbos is chayiv, that's also pretty simple and obvious. What's the point of the Mishnah? Mishum takabay leflugi. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shua. The point was to open up a discussion which led us in to further discussion, presenting the machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua, where he took another korban, a shlomim, let's say, and he was shechet l'shem Pesach. Rabbi Lezer says it's chayiv. Rabbi Shua says it's potter because he was a Tav Dar Mitzvah. So that's why the Mishnah opened up discussing the case of a Pesach shelo l'shmoi, where all agree it's pasul and it's chayiv, and then proceeded to the other case, which according to Bishua is very different. So we have that contrast between the first case, where even Bishua agrees it's pasul and he's chayiv, as opposed to the second case where he had another korban l'shem Pesach, and over there Bishua disagrees. He says it's very different, as we had discussed earlier in the Gemara. It was a point of contrasting one case to the other. And on account of that, the Mishnah already proceeded to finish off the complete list of cases where it's kosher and therefore he's potter, cases where it's pasul and therefore he's chayiv. Amalei Rav Huna bar China lebrei. Rav Huna bar China instructed his son, he azlis l'kamei Rabbi Zrika, when you approach Rabbi Zrika, boi minei, please ask him the following question. L'divra oimer mekalkel b'chabura potter. We know that generally speaking, for something to be considered a melacha on Shabbos, it needs to be melechas machshavas, something of a constructive nature. It needs to accomplish something. But merely mekalkel, destroying, that is not considered a malacha. There is one exception, which is chabura. If one inflicts an injury, so that's a tilada of sheichet and tilas neshama. In that case, there's a machlekes. Some say even mekalkel is chayiv. That is the very essence of chabura. You're destroying, you're hurting, you're injuring. Mekalkel b'chabura is chayiv. So this sets it apart from the other malachas. Elsewhere, you need to do something constructive and accomplish something. By chabura, even a kilkel is chayiv. But there's another shita which says, ha'emer mekalkel b'chabura pater. But even when it comes to chabura, you have to conform to the standard of the other malachas. It needs to be a positive malacha. For instance, says Rashi, the point of inflicting the wound is to get the blood out to feed his animal. Or another case would be to do shchita for the sake of enabling achila. So it's chabura with a positive twist. But if it doesn't have that element, it's a mekalkelis potter. So according to that shita, we have a kasha. The Mishnah said, Shachta shlei l'shmoi, shlei l'oichlav, chayiv. Because the Pesach is pasul, he did a mlacha. What did he do? He did a chabura. Matikin, what did he accomplish here? There's nothing positive or constructive here. This behemoth now is asal achila. It's a pasul carbon. So why does the Mishnah say that it's chayiv? So he responded, yeah, there was a tikkun. Why? Tikkun, in what way did he accomplish? Im alu la yerdu. Because although this carbon is pasul, but you're meant to know that biddi avid, when we have a carbon whose psul occurred in the azara, psulei bakodesh, the Gemara in Zvachim tells us that biddi avid, if you take that carbon and you put it on the mizbech, im alu, you no longer take it down, lo yerdu. It has some form of kedusha's carbon. So when this carbon Pesach was nishchat shaloi l'shmoi, that's a psul that occurred in the azara, the Beis Hamikdash. It's called psulei bakodesh. But the Evid, if it was Olu on the Mizbech, it's La Yerdu. So that's what he accomplished. That's what the Shechita did. It turned into a quasi-carbon here. And therefore he's Chayiv Achatas. What about the other case? Shochte v'nimtza Balmum. He discovered that it was a Balmum, in which case the Psul occurred prior to its arrival in the Beis Hamikdash. Chayiv. The Mishnah says in that case as well he's Chayiv. Matikin. What did he accomplish here? In this case, you don't have that element of im olu lo yerdu. So what did the shechita do? What constructive element is present here? Tikem beduken sheba'ayin. V'aliv the rekiva. We're speaking about a very specific balmum. Duken sheba'ayin. It had some type of membrane, some type of cataract in its eye. And when following Rabbi Kiva, v'aliv the rekiva, the Amar im olu lo yerdu. He says this type of light, relatively light mum. Why is it a light mum? Because lechatchila, this thing is kosher by birds. So because of that, Rekiva says this is different than the other mumim. And if one does a shchita on a balmum of this variety, im alu layerdu, once it's brought in the mizbech, it's no longer taken down. And that was a tikkun. The shchita accomplishes that. What about shachta v'nimtza treifa b'seiser pot? Mishnah told us if he did the shchita, and it turns out that it was a treif, had a hidden internal wound. He's potter because he couldn't have known any better. We make a diyak. Apparently, if it was exposed, he could have discovered it before the shchita. Then he's held accountable as to bring a chatas. He did a shchita on a treif, matikin. What did he accomplish in this case? We have a karm which is pasul. It's asa ba'achila. It's asa on the mizbeach. If it would go on the mizbeach, you would remove it. So what constructive element is present in the shechita? Tiken lahoitzim de nevela. He did accomplish something because it is not going to be a nevela. Had it died on its own, it would have been a nevela. It would have been tummy. The fact that he did shechita, that removes the nevela element, and it's not metame. Shechita really accomplishes two things. Number one, it's matir de basar ba'achila. And number two, it prevents tumah from descending. So although when you shech a treifa, which is asar b'achila, you haven't accomplished the first element. You're not being matir b'achila, but the shechita is effective regarding the second element. This animal is not going to be mitame. It's not an available. It was nishchat. We actually learned it from a pasuk, as discussed elsewhere. So that was the tikkun. The shechita accomplished something. Tahara. Maskef l'ravina. Hadasani. What about the following brayso, which says that hasheichet chatas b'Shabbos, b'chutz la'avodah zara. If a person does a shechita on Shabbos, on a chatas, with the intent of doing avodah zara with it, gimel chatois, he's liable to 3 chatois. Number 1, he did shechita on Shabbos, an unjustified malacha. Number 2, he did shechita on a kachim b'chutz, outside the Beis Hamikdash. Number 3, he was avodah zara. Ma'atiken. What did this fellow accomplish? It was merely a kilkel. Because in this case, he didn't even save it from tumah, because as Rashi explains, it's a takrivis avodah zara which is matame. So why is he chayav achatas? Omar Rav Avira shemoitzio imidei eva menachai. He did accomplish something, because in its lifetime it was considered eva menachai. A guy couldn't have this animal, but now after the shechita, at least it's no longer an eva menachai. That's considered a tikkun and an accomplishment. So in conclusion, we discussed 2 aspects. Firstly, what is the chiddush of Mishnah? Where it's kosher, then he's pater. Where the Pesach is pasal, then he's chayev on account of doing a malacha on Shabbos. Isn't that a straightforward, simple halacha? What's the chiddush here? And the Gemara says, you're right, there is no chiddush really inherent in all the details, but since we wanted to present Rabbi Lezer and Bishua, the Mishnah began discussing the Pesach Shloishma is chayev, proceeded to the case of Rabbi Lezer and Bishua. On account of that, it already elaborated on all the details, all different scenarios. The Gemara asked the kasha, how can there be a chiyuv chatas for a kilkel? If the carbon is puzzle, he was merely destroying. He wasn't involved in any constructive activity. The Gemara responded, actually he did accomplish something. When we're dealing with a shloig shmoi, he accomplished that the carbon is somewhat kosher, to the extent that if you bring it on the mizbeach, you no longer remove it. The same thing regarding Baal Mum, which is a specific type of mum, Dukan Shuba'ayim, which has that same halacha. Regarding a treifa, he saved it from becoming tamid. And finally, regarding the chatas, Avodah zara, he was moitzi midei ever menachai. Continues the Gemara, Shchote v'noida v'chu. The Gemara here is going to embark on a discussion regarding akira, which means as follows. Sometimes you can have, there are actually 2 examples here, a carbon which is no longer needed for its original purpose, original designation. Suppose he had an asham, and he no longer needs it. He used a different asham. He was mafresh an asham, then it went missing. He went and got another animal, and used that for his kapara. Now the lost one turned up. It's moisar asham, it's a remnant, it's no longer needed. What happens to that carbon? Gemara will tell us that you use it for the oila. You send it out to pasture, to roam the fields till it gets a mum, you sell it, take the value, take the money, and put it into the pushka. It was a shofar shaped pushka, actually many of them, in the Beis Hamikdash. Narrow on one side where you would drop the money into, and then on the other side it was wide, so that the caretaker would open it up and extract the content. It was shaped like a shofar. So the money, which was derived from this asham, which became a balmum, which was then sold, is going to be placed in that shofar and used for the oila in the Beis Hamikdash, a sort of oila tzibur, which is going to be used put on the mizbeach. It's called oilas kayetz hamizbeach. That's one example of a carbon which changed designations. Originally it was an asham, but now since it's no longer needed, it reverts to an oila. Another example would be a carbon pesach, which is no longer needed. Moisra pesach. That is going to be earmarked for shlomim. Now the question is, do we have to redesignate, reclassify the carbon? Does it have to be converted to the other carbon? Does it need akira in order for the asham to be used for oila? Do you have to uproot the asham status? Or does it just happen on its own? It's no longer needed. By default, this asham is designated for oila. The same thing regarding a Pesach, which is no longer needed. Do you have to actively transfer it? Do you have to convert it to a shlamim? Does it need akira? Or loy boi akira? We don't need to uproot. We don't need to transfer it, transform it, convert it, reclassify it as a shlamim. It's simply by default that a shlamim, that a korban Pesach, which is no longer needed, Moisar Pesach, is automatically slated, designated, and assumes the status of a shlamim. That's going to be the discussion in the upcoming Gemara. Amar vun amarav. Asham shenitik l'riyah. You have an asham which is no longer needed. And it was sent out, l'riyah, for grazing, for to roam the fields. Some explain that the Bezdin actually does this. They designate it as such. Some say that the owner gave it over to the shepherd to look after it. It's no longer being cared for as a korban. But it hadn't yet acquired a mum. V'shachta stam. The owner went over to this asham out in the field and he did a shchita unspecified. He didn't say what for. Kosher lo'ila. This thing is kosher lo'ila. Why? Because it's headed in that direction anyways. It was earmarked, at least its value, its money, was earmarked for oila. So by default, it assumes a status of an oila, and a shchita stam is considered a shchita l'shem oila, and it's kosher. Al makasavar loy boy akira. Apparently, Rav holds that you don't have to actively do akira. You don't have to uproot, redesignate this korban. Since it's headed for oila, it's slated to be turned into an oila. At least the value, the money is going to be used for oila. As a result of that, the kedusha and the status of oila descends on this asham, and the shchita stam already turns it into an oila. That is Rav Huna Marav's chiddush. If that's the case, they don't have to reclassify it. Kilo nitak nami. Then even if you haven't sent it out to the fields, the mere fact that you no longer need it, you've already brought the other korban as your asham. Even before nituk, this thing is already slated for oila. So why wouldn't the same halacha apply here as well? Why does he describe it as asham shenitek l'ru'iyah? Once it's been given over to the shepherd, then it's been redesignated by default to be used for an oila. Even before nituk, the mere fact that you no longer need it, that should be sufficient to give it the shame oila. Says, well, you're right. It's a gzera d'rabbanan. Min Torah, once it's no longer needed and it's headed in the direction of an oila, it has the din of an oila. But with the rabbanan, they didn't want to do that. Why? Gzera la'acha kapara ato l'fnei kapara. We're concerned that if nituk was not a requirement, the owner could simply approach his extra asham and do the shchita and have it become an oila. Perhaps he'll confuse things. He'll say, well, if I can do it now, then I can do it even before I already had my kapara with the other korban. In that case, certainly it doesn't work, because it's still a potential asham candidate. It's only after kapara that it works, because after kapara he no longer needs this korban. Now it's slated to be used for oila purposes, and therefore the shchita works l'shem, turns it into an oil. But koydem kapara, when he still can potentially use it for his own kapara, of course, it's not yet considered a potential oila. So on account of this concern that one thing might lead to the next, Chacham said, look, this only works after nituk, after it's been transferred to the shepherd, in which case an event took place, which highlights the fact that this thing needs to undergo some sort of status change prior to assuming the status of an oila. I.e., you have to already have your kapara in order for this thing to be slated for oila. So the fact that Chacham required it to become nitak, to begin over to the shepherd, to begin roaming the fields, that accentuates this requirement. And therefore, we say that if it's koydem nituk, it seems from the Rishonim that it's not even kosher. Midrabanan, they don't allow you to bring it in. Even if you did the shchita, we don't allow you to bring it, to be makter it. Umanot Tamer says, how do you know that the Chacham were concerned that one thing might lead to the next. This not. Asham Shemesa Balov. The owner of the Asham passed away. Oishin is Kapar Balov, or he already obtained his Kapar using a different animal. So what do you do with this leftover Asham? We have three shittas. Tanakama says, Yirashi Stoiv, let it roam the fields until it gets a mum, v'yimacher, and have it sold, v'yipul damav l'nadava, and the money will be donated to the Beis HaMikdash and be used for the oila l'keitz ha-mizbeach. Kaitz means like dry fig, like dessert. When the mizbeach was idle, you would use this money to supply oilas for the mizbeach. Reb Lezer Omer Yamus. He says, just as we know from Halachah Mishmei Sinai that a chatas who is ownerless needs to be yamus, you have to cause it to die. An asham and a chatas go hand in hand. The same halachah applies to asham. So an ownerless asham is yamus. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, he's very similar to the Tanakama. Yimacher, have it roam the fields, get a mum, then sell it. V'yavi b'dam of oila, and the owner himself will use the money to bring an oil. So unlike Tanakama, who learns that the money is going to be used to supply the oila sibur, Rabbi Yeshua holds the owner himself will personally bring his oila with the money derived from the asham that has a mum. B'dam of in, avagufa loy. He can only use the money obtained from selling off the asham. Avagufa loy, but he can't use the actual carbon itself, the leftover asham, as an oila. Why not? If in any case it's going to be his personal carbon, why can't he just take the animal and use it for his oila? Why go through the tircha, the bother of getting a mum, selling it, taking the money, and buying an oil with it? It must be the gaza lacha kapara atolfnei kapara, because we're concerned that if we allow him to just grab the behema and use it for his oila, and you won't differentiate between when it's after the kapara or before the kapara. And therefore we say, no, don't use the actual animal. You have to go through a process. Get a mum, sell it, use the money. And this way it highlights the fact that there needs to be a change of status. There needs to be a process completed. In which case he'll realize, yeah, this only works after kapara. Meaning once I've already used that, but the other asham for my kapara, now I can use this for the oil. The fact that we require this whole process will bring out that point. Shmamina. So you see, the Chacham were concerned about this type of confusion, and that explains Rav Huna Marav as well. Only after Nitech L'Ru'iyah, it's been given over to the shepherd, do we say, well, now you're free to use that as an oil. We need that process to be completed. This way, it brings out the requirement to wait patiently until after kapara has been completed. And then, indeed, this leftover carbon is automatically, by default, designated for oil. Eisvei Rav Chizla Rav Huna. Here's the kasha to Rav Huna. You say that a leftover asham, likewise a leftover pesach, does not need akira, since it's headed in direction, in the asham, direction of the oila. In the case of a leftover pesach, it's headed in the direction of a shlamim. Then halachically, we consider it by default as already having attained that status of that shlamim. If that's the case, we have a kash. The Mishnah said, "Shachtei v'noida shemoshcha bal mesyadim b'chul." So after the shechita, he discovered that the owner of this carbon pesach pulled away, backed away. There's no owner here. This pesach was ownerless. He pulled out. He died. Mishnah says that although the carbon pesach, of course, now is pasul, but he is pater because he's not held accountable. What do you do with this carbon pesach which is pasul? V'tanei Allah. And we learned in a brisa which explains the Mishnah. B'choil ki agavna yisarf miyad. If this thing would have happened during a ordinary weekday, the Mishnah is speaking about on Shabbos. Suppose it was a Tuesday, yisarf miyad. You immediately burn this carbon pesach which was nishchat without an owner. That's a loch of a carbon which has a psul, an inherent psul, a psul begufa, such as a carbon pesach without an owner. So you go and burn it. Let's analyze. This carbon pesach, who lost his owner, is now considered a Meiser Pesach. It's a remnant, a leftover from a Korban Pesach, and certainly meant to be used as a Shlomim. This makes sense if you say that the Korban Pesach needs to be transformed, converted to a Shlomim. Otherwise, we say, as long as you haven't done that, it still remains a Korban Pesach. Hi Pesach, yeah. Then in the meantime, it's still a Korban Pesach, even though he lost his owner, because nobody converted it to a Shlomim. Okay, so since it's a Pesach, the Kiva the Leslie Bailam, so since he did the Shechita on a Pesach that has no owner, Havali Psul Begufay. It now has an inherent Psul. Amatulacha Yisarf Miyad. That explains the halacha. Why it's burnt immediately. Because a korban that has a Psul big Gufay goes l'sreif. But that's only if this thing is still a Korban Pesach. Because nobody came to be Oiker that Korban Pesach. A Korban Pesach without an owner goes l'sreifa. That explains the Brisa, explains the Mishnah. But according to you, that a Korban Pesach which is headed for Shlomim, it's no longer needed as a Korban Pesach. You don't have to do Akira to turn into a Shlomim. It happens automatically, by default. If that's the case, so why do you burn this Korban Pesach? Mereisha, even initially before the Shechita, Havali Shlomim. It already assumed the status of a Shlomim. So why do you burn it? You can be makar of a Shlomim without an owner. Psule Mishumai. Why is this thing unfit? Why is it possible? Mishum davar achar. It's on account of an external cause. Fine. Generally, the Pesach was after the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim. That's only allowed by the Korban Pesach. But if this korban was now a Shlomim, right, because by default it turns into a Shlomim, then he did something wrong. He did the Shechita after the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, in which case it's possible. Tais Newman has a whole explanation why it's possible. You can't be makta the Emurin. Perhaps you can't even do the Zrikas Adam. Fine. So I understand that there's some problem here. But that's not called Psule Begufay. The root cause of the Psul is not emanating from the korban itself. There's a side reason. And if that's the case, you have no justification. You have no right to burn this thing. Ibur Tzuraboy. You have to wait. You have to undergo a process. You have to leave it overnight. Ibur Tzura means it changes its form, it becomes spoiled. It means to say that, at least Rashi learns that way, it means that you leave it overnight until it becomes possibilina. And then you can burn it. Because otherwise, it would be considered bizoyin kachim. Since the korban itself doesn't have a psul, inherent psul, to burn it would be considered disrespectful, so you have to wait for Ibur Tzura. You can't just go burn this korban outright. The Sani, we learned in the Brisa. Zakla. This is the general formula by psulim. Kol shel psuli b'gufay. When a korban has an inherent psul, you saraf miyad. You burn it immediately. You don't have to wait for tomorrow. But damu b'balam. But if there's an external reason for psul, something wrong with the dam, something wrong with the owner, to Ibur Tzura, you first have to wait for Ibur Tzura, you have to wait for Lina, and then v'yetz l'beis ha'shreifa. Then you burn it. So this is a kashan on Rav Huna Marav, who says that when we have a Pesach, which is no longer needed as a Pesach, and slated to be used for a Shlomim, it automatically assumes the status of a Shlomim by default. This thing is now a Shlomim. So why did we learn that if you did the Shechita on an ownerless Korban Pesach, you burn it immediately? Why? Once it's ownerless, it's no longer designated for Pesach. It's meant to be used, it's earmarked for Shlomim. And that happens automatically, according to Yoshita. A Shlomim without an owner? Perfectly kosher. So why do you burn it? Elamai, there's another problem here because of the timing. It was after the Tamid. Fine. That's an external psul which would require us to wait overnight before burning. So we have a raya from this Mishnah, from this Brisa, which tells you burn this Korban Pesach, that apparently until there was an Akira done, it still maintains its Pesach status. And that's why it's considered Psuli Begufay, because you took a Korban Pesach and you did a Shechita without an owner. That's a kasha on Rav. Says him what you write. Let's change the version of events. Ella leitema shchate stam kasha shemayla. Rav never said that if you take the asham, which is no longer needed, and you did a stam, unspecified shchita, it's automatically considered an oila, because by default, an unneeded, the asham is an oila. No, that's not true. We just disproved that. You have to be accurate. You have to convert it, to reclassify it. Ella Ema rather say like this. What did Rav say? You have an asham, shenitik l're'iyah, and shachtik l'shum oila, kosher. If you did the shchita for the sake of oila, in which case you reclassified, redesignated that asham, yeah, then it's kosher. Alma by akira. Apparently, you need akira to change its status. It doesn't happen automatically by default. That explains our halacha by Korban Pesach as well. It's still a Pesach. Once a Pesach, always a Pesach, unless you reclassify it, in which case it didn't happen in our case. And therefore, he took this Pesach and did a shechita without an owner. It's psulei begufay. A Pesach without an owner is possible. Therefore, it gets burned immediately. Says the Gemara, but we actually have a shita who clearly holds that it happens on its own. An unneeded Pesach is considered by default a shlamim. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, the Amar, he said like this: Nizrika mipi chabura va'amri. It was expressed by the entire group. They all agreed to the following. This was in reference to a Mishnah that we learned earlier, which indicated that even a unneeded Korban Pesach, seemingly unneeded Korban Pesach, will not automatically revert to shlamim status. It needs to be uprooted. You need to have akir. Now this entire group actually held that an unneeded Korban Pesach is by default considered a shlamim. So they came to explain that Mishnah, which indicated otherwise, and said like this. The Mishnah is speaking about a unique case, not your typical. Kigoyin, shoyubalim tmei mesim. The owner of this korban was a tmei meis. V'nitchir in the Pesach Sheni. And he was pushed off to Pesach Sheni. In which case, he's still going to need this korban. This korban is still earmarked for his Pesach use. Therefore, it's not your typical Moisar Pesach, which automatically will revert to Shlamim status. Because this Pesach is still designated to be used as a korban Pesach. He's going to use it on Pesach Sheni. Hayu de Bayakira. So this korban, in order for it to become a Shlamim, needs to be reclassified. You need Akira there, because it doesn't happen by default, since it's still meant to be used as a korban Pesach. But otherwise, an unneeded Korban Pesach automatically turns into a Shlamim. You don't have to convert it. So according to this Shita, Michael Amema, how are we going to explain the mission, the Bryce that we learned earlier? We have a ownerless Korban Pesach who was nishchat without an owner. We learned that you take it and you burn it. Apparently it's considered psulei begufay. What's the psul? An unneeded Korban Pesach, by default, is already considered a shlam. A shlamim is kosher without an owner. So although we changed Rav's shita, originally we figured that Rav holds that an unneeded Korban Pesach is by default a shlamim. We changed that. We said no, it's not automatic. But we found another shita who clearly holds as such that an unneeded Korban Pesach is automatically by default considered a shlamim. If that's the case, we don't understand the halacha of streifa. Why is it possible? It's considered a shlamim on its own. A shlamim without an owner is kosher. Ella Amar Rav Huna Breid Rav Yeshua. He says like this. Let's go back to the original version. Rav indeed held that an unneeded asham automatically reverts to oila. An unneeded Korban Pesach automatically assumes shlamim status. The question remains, why? If he did a shechita on a Pesach without an owner, is it going to be puzzle and going to be burnt? It should have become a shlamim on its own. We're speaking about a very specific case, in which case it becomes puzzle. How's that? We're speaking about a case he was mafresh to Korban Pesach before Chatzos, before the Zman Shechita. Umesu balam achar Chatzos, and the owner passed away after Chatzos. In which case it was a short moment, a small point in time where this Korban Pesach was Ra'i for Hakrava. The owner was around somewhat after Chatzos. and then he was mace. The havale nira, this carbon was suitable, was roi fa'akrova at a certain point in time, v'nitcha, and then got pushed away. You only have one chance, one shot at it. If this carbon was roi and then got pushed away, it's over. Once a carbon goes through this process, it's roi fa'akrova and it gets pushed away, it's too late. It no longer gets a second chance. When do we say that an unneeded Pesach turns into a shlomim? That's in the case where it was never nearer. For instance, the owner passed away before Chatzos. It was never roi for a carbon Pesach. In that case, it would automatically reverse to shlomim, as opposed to this case, where there was a point in time where it was roi for Pesach, until the Balaam died. Something which is roi and then gets pushed away from Pesach is pushed away for all time and is no longer considered a shlomim. It rather is considered a Pesach, and a Pesach without an owner is puzzle. If you do a shechita on that, it's psule beguva, it's inherently puzzle, and therefore it gets burnt. So although generally an unneeded Pesach will turn into a shlamim, but in this case where it was a roi for Pesach, it was already after Chatzos, it could have been brought potentially, but then became unsuitable, nir vinetcha, that's too late. Says the Gemara, miduhu tamel Rav, but aren't we coming to address Rav's shita? That's what we're coming to understand. Rav's shita, he'll hold that the Karam Pesach by default will turn into a shlamim. So why do you burn it? The answer is because we're speaking about this case where it was nitcha. We're following Rav's shita, and we'll work according to Rav. Ha'amar Rav. Rav himself said, Bali Chaim einam nidachim. You can't push away animals, just as a carbon which has a mum over, a temporary mum. So as long as the mum is there, you can't be makriv, but after the mum goes away, then it reverts to its original status. Rav holds that this concept of nitcha doesn't apply to Bal Chai. So even in the case where the Baalim passed away after Chatzos, in which case the animal was roi for Korban Pesach, we don't say that roi and then nitcha pushes it away for all time. No, it's still roi. If not for Pesach, it's roi for Shlamim. So why do you burn it? Elomar of Papa, the Gemara will suggest another pshat. Hamani or Blezi, we're following Blezi shita. The Amar, v'chein hashechet acherim l'shem Pesach pasel. He holds that any carbon whose shchita was done l'shem Pesach is pasel. This is discussed in the Gemara elsewhere. And if that's the case, you're right, you're 100% right. This unneeded carbon Pesach is really a shlamim. But what did he do? He did the shlamim l'shem Pesach. That in itself is a reason for psul. That's why you burn it. The havale psule begufay. It's an inherent psul, and therefore it's pasel, and therefore you burn it. Says the Gemara, but it still won't work. Why? Because the Mishnah tells us, if he was sheikhed this Pesach, whose owner passed away, it's pasel, and he is potter. Meaning, if it was done on Shabbos, he's potter because it was unknown to him. He's not held accountable for the fact that the owner passed away. This won't work according to Rabbi Lezer. If this halacha is linked to Rabbi Lezer, it will be incompatible with Rabbi Lezer. If you're Rabbi Lezer, he chatas nami mechayev. You have to bring a chatas. The halesler Rabbi Lezer toy with mitzvah patur. Unlike Rabbi Yeshua holds that if one was confused on account of a mitzvah, he's patur from chatas. Rabbi Lezer doesn't agree with that. So in this case, he should be held accountable. He should have to bring a chatas. So apparently we can't be following Rabbi Lezer's shita. So that pshat is off the table. Ella says the Gemara, one final pshat. Again, we're going to explain why this unneeded Pesach, which really should have reverted to Shlam automatically. Why do we say that if you did the Shechita without an owner, you go burn it? A Shlam without an owner is kosher. Elo Tirgma Rav Yosef, Brei, the Rav Salach Hasidah. So he interpreted it, Kamei de Rav Papa, as follows. Homani, this halacha that he burned this Korban Pesach, is following Shitas, Yosef ben Choy Noihi. This nan, Yosef ben Choy Oimer, Haneshchatel M'Shem Pesach L'Shem Chatos Psul. He holds, like Rabbi Lezer, that a carbon which was Nishchat L'Shem Pesach and also L'Shem Chatos is possible. Almo Psula Begufi. That's why in this case, when you took a Shlam, you're right, it's a Shlam, because it automatically reverts to Shlam. An unneeded Korban Pesach is a Shlam, but a Shlam L'Shem Pesach is possible. It's Psula Begufi. U'Mishamachi Yisaref Miyad. That's why it's burnt immediately. On the one hand, he holds like Rabbi Lezer. When it comes to accountability, the Chi of Chatas, in that he disagrees with Rabbi Lezer. U'epturi sav l'Rabbi Yehoda. He holds like Rabbi Yehoda that a Tov Dvar Mitzvah is Pater. That's why in this case, there will be no Chatas. So in short, we concluded that Rav indeed holds that an asham which is no longer needed automatically turns into an oila. Likewise, a Pesach which is no longer needed automatically reverts to shlamim status. Loi boy akira. You don't have to go and uproot it. It happens by default. If that's the case, why? If so, does the Mishnah tell us? And the Brisa explains. Now, when you take a Pesach whose owner passed away, and you do the shechita on that Pesach, you go and burn it right away, indicating that it has an inherent psul. Well, if it's an unneeded Pesach, it's a shlam. A shlamim without an owner is kosher. So we had several attempts, and the final pshat was because a shlamim which was done l'shem Pesach is possible. Rav Ashi Omar, he had another approach, another suggestion to answer the kasha. The kasha was that according to Rav, an unneeded Pesach, a moisar ha-Pesach, is automatically a shlamim. If that's the case, then why do we learn in a brisa that this carbon, which was nishchat without an owner, is pasal begufay, gets burnt? Why? Says Rav Ashi, it's actually a machlokes tanoim. And Rav will follow the other shita, the other Tana, who holds that no, this thing won't get burnt because it's actually a shlamim. So the Tana that said that it gets burnt holds that it's still a Pesach, because unless he actually uproots it, it still retains its Pesach status. Pesach without an owner is Yisarif. Rav will follow a different shita, which holds that you don't have to have akira, you don't have to uproot it for it to change its status. It's automatic. It's by default. An unneeded Pesach turns into a shlamim. And therefore, in this case, when it had no owner, you wouldn't have streifa. You're right, there would be no streifa. Rav Ashi Amar Rav the Amar Rabbi Shmuel B'noi So Rabbi Yecham Brek. This time, Rabbi Shmuel B'noi So Rabbi Yecham Brek Omer. He says like this: if there was a shechita on Shabbos on this carbon whose owner passed away, or backed away from the carbon, left the carbon, became a non-owner, abdicated his position, his ownership, or if he became tummy, what is the halacha there? If there was enough time available within that day to find out the fact, enough time in which case he could have investigated, figured out that the bailam is no longer an owner, or the fact that he died, or that became tummy, then he's accountable. He has to bring a chatas. It's called a shoygig. He could have and he should have investigated prior to shechita. He should have found out what's going on with this carbon. So on the one hand, it's chayiv. Now, what do you do with this carbon? You don't burn it immediately. You have to wait for ibur tzura, which according to Rashi means leave it overnight, till it becomes noiser, and then if you yoytzel beis hasreifa, then you burn it. My time, why don't you burn it immediately? Lav mishum deloy bayakir. Apparently, this Tana Rabbi Shmuel holds that this Pesach, which is no longer needed for Pesach, is automatically considered a shlamim. Therefore, it's not psula begufay, because even if it has no owner, a shlamim without an owner is kosher. So you may not burn it. You have to wait till it becomes lean and then you burn it. And Rav follows this shit. Says the Gemara, Mimai. How would you know that this is the pshat? That the reason why Rabbi Shmuel doesn't burn it immediately is based on your contention that the carbon is really a shlamim, because by default the Pesach turns into a shlamim. Dilma, perhaps no. He holds that it doesn't happen automatically. Boy Akira. In order to turn the Pesach into a shlamim, you have to turn it into a shlamim, you have to convert it. If that's the case, then this carbon is still a Pesach. It hadn't yet been tampered with. It still remained Pesach. A Pesach without an owner is burnt. So why don't we burn it? Dilma Mishum de Savala, perhaps Rabbi Shmuel holds like the Shita that any psul cannot be burnt immediately. Even a real, inherent psul. He holds like Ketana Devei Rabbi Baravo, the Amar, He holds afilu pigul now by ibratzura. Even real pigul needs to be left overnight. The yol of oven minoisa. He learns it with Exer Shava. Oven from Noisa. And just as over there, it was left overnight, and only that enables Sreifa, pigul as well. So perhaps the Pshat of Rabbi Shmuel is very different than your approach. Rabbi Shmuel really holds that it retains Pesach status, unless it's been diverted. So this carbon without an owner is still Pesach. Why then don't you burn it? A Pesach without an owner, a Shechita without an owner is possible. The reason is because any psul needs to be left overnight. And therefore, it's unrelated to Rav. Rav holds that a Pesach automatically, by default, turns into a Shlamim. No, Rabbi Shmuel doesn't necessarily hold that way. And I'll prove my point. Because otherwise, how are you going to understand the following halacha? Rabbi Shmuel Bnei Shabrech and Breka discussed 3 cases. The Balaam died, he backed off from the carbon, or he became tummy. In the case of Nitmu Baila, Michael Amema, how are you going to explain things? Havade Bayakira. In that case, when the Balaam is tummy, and he still needs this carbon for Pesach Sheni, it doesn't automatically revert to Shlamim, as we learned earlier, because it's still earmarked for Pesach use. It won't turn into a Shlamim unless somebody uprooted and changed the status. The Omar Rabbi Chia Bar Gamda, this we learned earlier, the whole group agreed that the case there in the Mishnah that we say a Pesach needs to be uprooted, otherwise it remains Pesach, it doesn't turn into a Shlam by default. It's speaking about a case, the owner was a Tamei Meis, Pesach Sheni, and was pushed off to Pesach Sheni, in which case he still needs this carbon. So we see from there that all agree. When a Balam is Tamei, his carbon still retains its Pesach classification, because it's still earmarked for Pesach use on Pesach Sheni. If that's the case, then why does Rabbi Shmuel Bnei Shabrech and Breka say that in this case of Nitmu Balam, and in that case certainly the Pesach still retains its Pesach status, and the Shechita was done, in which case it's a carbon Pesach puzzle, because the owner was tummy, there's no eater there. Still, Rabbi Shmuel says you can't burn it immediately, you have to wait until the next morning. Why? It's psul begufay. This thing is a carbon Pesach with a psul, an inherent psul. Apparently, because Rabbi Shmuel holds that even a psul gufay needs to be left overnight to enable streifa. Now, if that's the pshat in the case of nitma, then we assume that this applies to the entire discussion of Rabbi Shmuel. All 3 cases, nitma balam, mesu balam, moshcha balam esideim, all discussing the same context. They're all based on the same principle. That no, the Pesach is still Pesach. Because Rabbi Shmuel holds the Pesach doesn't turn into a Shlam by itself. It doesn't happen automatically. It still retains its Pesach status unless somebody converts it. But otherwise, by default, it's still Pesach. And despite the fact that there was a real psul here, a serious psul, the Shechita was without an owner, etc., we still have to leave it overnight because he holds like the Shita that any psul needs to be left overnight to enable strafe. But certainly, Rabbi Shmuel holds that a Pesach will be a Pesach unless somebody came and changed the status. And this is not like Rav, who holds that an unneeded Pesach will by default turn into a Shlamim. So you attempted to support Rav using Rabbi Shmuel, B'nai, Shabrech and Breka, and the conclusion is, well, it's just the opposite. Apparently he holds that a Karm Pesach by default is still a Karm Pesach. Ella, rather you must say, let's go back to the first approach. Machvarta, it seems that the clear and correct approach is Kedeshani Mikar, as we answered earlier. Yosef ben Chenoihi. Then indeed, the Shmuel holds Pesach Boi Akira, not like Rav. Even an unneeded Pesach remains Pesach. Rav, however, was following the other Tana, the Tana of our Mishnah, the Tana of the Brisa mentioned on top of the Yomid, who in his opinion held the Pesach loy boyakira. You don't have to change it in order for it to automatically change. It happens by default. An unneeded Pesach turns into a shlamim. If that's the case, then we had a kasha. Right? We had that kasha. So why is it that you burn it? If this Pesach was unneeded, then automatically reverts to shlamim. A shlamim without an owner is fine. So why did we learn that this Pesach, which is really a shlamim, needs to be burnt? Yosef ben Chanoi, following Yosef ben Chanoi, who holds that true, it's a shlamim, but you meant to know that a shlamim l'shem Pesach is possible, as the Gemara concluded earlier. Hadron loch eludvar. So, in conclusion, went back to the Mishnah, which gave us several examples where when the Korban Pesach on Shabbos is kosher, then he's potter from malacha. If the Korban Pesach is pasul, then he did a malacha. And he's chayiv. The Gemara said, well, isn't that simple? It's a simple formula. What's the point of going into it? The Gemara explained that we simply wanted to present the machlekes to Rabbi Yehuda. On account of that, we discussed the entire gamut of possibilities. The Gemara kasha, well, chatas for mekalkel? He's simply engaged in destruction. He's destroying an animal. So why, if the Korban Pesach is pasul, is he chayiv chatas? The Gemara answered, well, he did some tikkun. Im adu lo yerdu. He removed the tumah, or he removed the Eiver Ben Achai. Rav Huna told us the name of Rav, in the final version of things, that when we have an Asham who is no longer needed for Asham, the owner already had his kapara elsewhere, then automatically that Asher is earmarked for Oila. And therefore, should somebody approach the carbon and do the Shchita, it now turns into an Oila. The same thing applies to Korban Pesach, which is no longer needed. The Moisar Pesach automatically turns into a Shlamim. If so, the question remains, why? If the owner passed away, and they proceeded to do shchita on this ownerless Korban Pesach, you go and you burn it? An ownerless Korban Pesach should have on its own turned into a shlamim. A shlamim is fine without an owner. So sure, it was done after the Tamid Sheben Arbayim, and that in itself creates a psul, but for that, you can't go ahead and burn it right away. You have to wait till next morning. That's an external psul. So why do we go and burn it right away? And the final pshat was, we're following the shita of Yosef ben Chanoi, who said that even a shlamim, whose shchita took place, l'shem Korban Pesach, is pasul, and that's a psuloi begufa, an inherent psul, which justifies and requires immediate treif. Hatzlacha Rabba, be well.